I guess someone really got tweaked by all my talk about estimation velocity and not using time. And they published an article called Velocity and Throughput Are Full of Crap. And I'm using the word crap instead of what they put. They put shizzle on there. And what I can tell you is that this piqued my interest because I do a pretty darn good job, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, of really hammering down why we estimate using story points, what it means in the whole 9 yards. Let's see where this particular individual takes this discussion. If you run enough agile teams with Scrum using story points and velocity as an internal gauge for planning the volume of work to be completed, you may accidentally use the term velocity in a conversation with stakeholders. Let's pause. I intentionally use the term velocity in a conversation with stakeholders, and I back it up with a red light, green light report. I think the thing is, most organizations do not understand how to properly present velocity as a term to leadership, executive, stakeholders, etc. And in turn, they try to tie velocity back to time somehow, and that makes all the forecasts off base. Let's see where he takes this. Let's continue. As if by magic, this term will certainly be picked up and slowly creep into and become a performance and planning metric. Let's stop there. Velocity should never, ever, under any circumstance, ever be used as a performance metric. You can't say, oh, this team does 20 points. That team does 18 points. That means the 20-point team is better. False. Doesn't work that way. Because each team's going to have a different velocity based on calibration. So with that being said, even comparing individuals to one another or teams to one another, that's flawed logic. You shouldn't ever do that. Now, when it comes to a planning metric, all day long, I will use velocity for planning, forecasting all day long, and my estimates always come out on average about 85% accurate. So you can use story points and velocity for that every single time. Let's continue. No matter how many articles have been published on the topic of avoiding velocity as a performance metric, he agrees. This happens over and over. Good, good. I'm back on a horse. As soon as velocity becomes a typical part of the team's metric lexicon, the stakeholders are eyeing this number like a hawk, asking the teams to drive a 10% increase in velocity year after year. Okay, let's pause there. I don't, once again, believe that you should ever, if you've ever watched The Price is Right, this is the analogy I give in my class, and you have the little yodeling guy who's climbing up the mountain, yodelay, yodelay. When he gets to the top of the mountain, what happens? He falls off and dies. The reason why I bring that up is just because I feel like if we keep focusing on increasing velocity as a performance metric, you're going to burn people out. You can't reward people who are doing a great job with more work. Now, there's a difference between optimizing a team and getting them to optimize the amount of work they can take on and constantly asking for that 10% increase. I mean, I know in business school they tell you to keep asking until the team says no, but you've got to get past that if you're going to be really good at Agile. You got to get to the point where you're like, I'm not going to fall into that trap. Okay. So if you run, it comes down to stakeholder focus. So let's continue. It says stakeholder focus on perfecting the velocity is enough to make everyone in the engineering team question validity of story points altogether. Compounded by the teams being frequently confused about what story points actually are, the constant scope and complexity discussions, or scope versus complexity discussions, and the lengthy story planning poker meetings only adds to that divide. Okay, let's pause there for a second. I hate to keep pausing, but I have to. Stakeholder focus on perfecting the velocity is enough to make everyone on an engineering team question the validity of story points. Facts. You should never have them questioning story points. Story points are what they are. It's what the team can do. It's a measurement of volume. You can't fit 32 ounces of liquid in a 16-ounce cup. It doesn't work that way. So the velocity is a measurement of volume of work that can be completed by a concerted team with a concerted effort. Right? It makes sense if you look at it that way. The second part says, compounded by teams frequently being confused about what story points actually mean. I agree. Most teams and most individuals and most organizations don't study and practice what story points actually mean. And that's the big cause for confusion. The constant scope versus complexity discussions. Okay, let's pause there for a second too. If you're looking at everything, how complex is it? I want to know how big of a job it is, right? And I think that does incorporate elements of complexity. But if you just looked at complexity alone, you would say, well, for Susie, it's a complex job. For Mike, it's not. You can't do that, right? You got to look at it overall and say, just what is the size of the job? And I think that's going to help you go a long way. You set a benchmark for small and then compare it to that, and then compare everything to each other. Or the lengthy story point meetings. Let's stop there. The story poker meetings, he calls it. Story poker meetings, planning poker. I love Mike Cohn as much as the next person, but I can't agree any more here that those planning poker games, they take forever. And the result you get out of it's about 34% accuracy with your estimates. It's just not worth it. You need to find a better way to do this. Now, we've introduced the concept of rapid release planning and t-shirt sizing and an affinity clustering of features. And if you take a look at rapid release planning, you're going to see there's a much better way. Used internally and undisclosed to the outside world, story points of velocity can be a pretty good approach at roughly estimating the effort of the team that can reasonably take on every sprint. Story points are not an estimation of effort. Story points are an estimation of volume. I don't know how many times I have to say that, but velocity starts with a V, volume starts with a V. The velocity is a measurement of volume. And it says, but not if velocity becomes a team metric used externally and weaponized. Yes, got it. I won't dive into the insanity on this, thank goodness, which shows absolute ignorance on behalf of leadership. No, it shows overall ignorance in the organization by not understanding what story points and velocity are, but then trying to leverage them for estimation and forecasting. This comes back to someone being an expert on auto mechanics or auto racing, but they've never repaired a car. You can't do that. You need to bring in someone that understands what's going on that's going to help you see it from an outside perspective. And this person is proposing that we need to get away from story points. And he says there's an alternative trend that's been adopted by many teams getting away from velocity and counting throughput. He says the way throughput works, instead of counting some marginal estimation in points, the team will report back on the sprint throughput, a count of how many backlog items were completed each sprint. Okay, let's pause there. I'm going to say that this person is on the right track. I'm going to say it again. They're on the right track. Throughput is a measurement of volume, the number of stories completed. Now, if you can keep all your stories small in size, then you can just count the number of stories. The problem with just using throughput alone is that sometimes you have stories that are large in size, medium in size, small in size, extra small, extra large, and those can't all count the same. But if the team does a fantastic job of breaking everything down into smaller, extra small, then yes, throughput all the way. Go throughput. I'm team throughput all day long, right? But that's usually not the case, right? So with that being said, the team should take on a sentiment of let's take on enough work this sprint so that we can match the throughput of last sprint. This is called yesterday's weather, and it's something that's been around forever. So I think that if you look at this way, and then he gets into the decomposition of the work and how, and he's on the right track, keeping things small. But then he goes on to talk about the uncomfortable situation where you have things that are different levels of complexity based on one being an API integration and something being something different. I mean, I'm not going to read the whole entire article because we've been here for almost for several minutes, and I feel like we get the gist of where we're trying to go with this. It's not reasonable for organizations to let teams live and die by the sword of story points. Fact. Yeah, I'll take it one step further. No team should ever be measured on performance or productivity based on the metric of how many points they can complete. Fact. I'm also going to go on a record and say that teams that are doing Agile most correctly are using t-shirt sizes and are using as a measurement of volume, and they're calculating their velocity as a measurement of volume, and their velocity becomes consistent over the course of many sprints. What I can tell you is my teams have a plus or minus 2 points every single sprint. It's just the way it is, right? And I'm going to knock on wood here. I have not used time-based estimates now for better than 8 years. And I have not gone wrong. I have not played planning poker in 5 years, 6 years. I don't remember if it was 5 or 6. I think it's 6. But I haven't played planning poker in 5 or greater years. Yes? So what I'm trying to say is You don't have to reinvent the wheel. The tools are all already here. Now, can you leverage a tool like Planning Poker and map the t-shirt sizes where 1 is extra small, 2 small, 3 is medium, 5 is large, and 8 is extra large, and use the cards to help you get better at t-shirt size estimates? You bet. Absolutely, all day long. But I think the secret sauce here is not to get so hung up on comparison. Stop trying to tear it back to time and understand that velocity and throughput are not necessarily full of crap, but that when used correctly, they can really help your team gain success easily in their Agile implementation. That's going to do it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.